All right, so I'm going to tell kind of a short story, just what our team was dealing with in terms of unreliable tests and how we were able to use Cypress specifically to fix it. So again, my name is Kevin Ramirez. I'm a software engineer at Zendesk, and this is going to be our story. All right. So we have the problem of flaky tests and unreliability. So I think the story starts if we go back a little bit. So probably about 2 years ago, we had a situation where we were doing a feature rollout for some new functionality, and we kind of had some tests that were a little bit older, hadn't really been maintained too much. They kind of needed some work. And one of my first tasks at Zendesk on my team as a full-time team member was to create some automated like Ruby browser tests. And so I went through that as my first task, and I ran into a bunch of challenges, kind of using an older test framework, something that I wasn't super familiar with. We talk about like flaky tests. Maybe we have a specific element on the page that we click sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So just, a number of challenges with our existing test framework that we were using. And so I didn't realize it then, but off into another space, we had another engineer who was actually writing a Cypress test. And so little did I know that one engineer writing the Cypress test in a slightly different area as a part of this feature rollout would lead me and our team to actually adopt Cypress full-time for all of our automated end-to-end testing needs, and really help us solve this problem with our flaky tests. So just to go back a little bit, so our testing challenge, we had flaky tests, kind of unreliable results, not often consistent, kind of unpredictable. That leads to, like, when we're rolling new functionality out, low confidence. When you're rolling something out, you want to have a reliable signal of, hey, is this working? How do I know that something hasn't broken somewhere? Especially with our most critical paths, you have different types of tests that you want to run more frequently, less frequently, and you want all of them to be stable. And then, of course, when you have bad tests, there's a significant maintenance burden. So how many times do you have to take time out of your sprint and have Jira stories to fix this test that's broken? And it's not always clear why. So we had a little bit of a time issue with spending time on these broken tests. Now, I looked into this other test that in the other area of our rollout that one of our developers was writing. I noticed it was Cypress, and I had no idea what Cypress was. Like, I had never used it. We took the tests side by side. And so the ones that I wrote versus the ones that this other developer wrote in Cypress, his was so much more reliable and faster than mine was. And so I really took a look at this and I was like, what's the deal here? So I looked at it, and not only were they super reliable, they were fast. Looking into like the developer experience of playing around with the tests and just getting the test running to start with, it's super easy. Like, it's just like a one command, like, boom, you've got Cypress open. I've got a whole UI where I can see all my tests. So I kind of fell in love with that. And then you have Cypress Cloud, which you have a whole dashboard of all your test runs, your analytics, how many of you use test replay. I don't even watch the replay video anymore. I just use test replay. It's like a huge feature in Cypress Cloud. For any kind of debugging or figuring out what's going on in the test. So with all of that in mind, taking a look at the one Cypress test versus my other tests, I realized we should really take a hard look at this. And so I advocated for us to do a project to review our feature coverage and then rewrite all of our tests essentially using Cypress. All right, so let's look at the process that we took. So initially, it took some convincing, and then we decided, okay, like, this is a really important area. We really need to have solid tests. So we did an initial POC. We took a couple of critical tests that we wanted to rewrite, and we kept the original ones around, and then we rewrote them in Cypress, and we compared the two. And again, we see like a massive reliability and speed difference. And so from that point, we're like, okay, let's fully commit. We wrote all the Jira stories. We did all the tasks, and it was a process like to go through all of the features that we owned. Make sure we review everything, and then make sure we're not over covering stuff, or we're covering our features properly, and then actually implementing the Cypress tests. That was a really fun experience, and I learned so much about testing and about Cypress during that. And so once we fully migrated all of our tests, I think it took about a month, if I remember correctly. It wasn't that it wasn't that bad. This wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It was actually very, really pleasant experience. At the end of that, if we kind of fast forward, we take this one team and we have all the features that we own. They're all rewritten in Cypress testing wise. And we actually have different types of tests. So we have like more expansive tests that serve as kind of regression tests that run a little bit less frequently. And then we have some other tests that are more critical. They run really frequently. So those are kind of the critical shorter test runs that we need to make sure that everything's working properly at all times. And so now that we had both of those in place, fully rewritten in Cypress, we were able to do like a lot of really cool things now that we probably wouldn't have wanted to do before. So the example of that is implementing those tests with our CI/CD pipelines, GitHub Actions, our deployment pipelines, like all of that good stuff that really you should have in place so that you can have a reliable signal as you're deploying or rolling out, or you're putting a PR up. You want to have all those things in place, and rewriting our tests in Cypress allowed us to do that like almost single-handedly. So that was really cool to see. Now, initially, like I can speak for myself. So there are naturally a couple of challenges that you're going to face when you're doing something like this. I think for me, just coming from like the Ruby world, looking at stuff like RSpec, and then you look at Cypress, it's a little bit different. And it took me the first couple of tests, I think, to understand like, okay, there's a whole different way to write the tests. And in looking at it now, I think it's actually easier using Cypress, but just the whole async nature, the execution of the tests, the way they are supposed to flow, it just takes a little bit of a learning curve in the beginning. The other thing you have to take into account is ecosystem and integration. So like probably for all different organizations have different needs. And for us, like we have specific internal needs. Like, we need to get a test account and we need to figure out how to do certain things. We have a really great productivity team that helped us implement some of those things for Cypress. So now we have everything at our fingertips, and it was really easy to integrate into the Cypress tooling. Then you have the challenge of actually committing and like taking the time to rewrite the tests. I can promise you it was well worth it for us. So that time commitment was necessary, but it definitely paid off. And then having to make a little bit of a cultural shift. Now, when I say cultural shift, I mean, let's say you're working on something, you have a Slack notification that comes up, and it's a failing test. So a lot of times, if you're used to having flaky tests, or you just know that the tests are not super consistent, you'll often look at it and you'll say, okay, that's probably a flaky test. Like I don't know if we really need to prioritize that. Well, now that you have really good tests, now that changes, because your mindset has to be, okay, when I have a test that's failing, it's actually because of something's probably wrong with the functionality that we're rolling out, or maybe something has gone wrong somewhere. We need to take a look and prioritize fixing and figuring out what the issue is. So that's one of the challenges that I actually didn't expect, but again, something that comes with time and is well worth it. So these are some rough numbers. So we pulled this from our metrics system. And if you look at test reliability, so after everything has been done, this is like 6 months after, you have like roughly 90% of the tests passing. It's not great. Now we have like 99 plus, and that's what we want to consistently see that number like as high as possible. And anytime a test fails, we want it to be because something is actually wrong, not because we can't click on an HTML element of some kind and it's there, but we just can't click on it. Another huge thing that we've seen is like our job durations have decreased pretty good. So I would say the actual test runs themselves, like in Cypress Cloud, they're actually a lot shorter. But we have like a job set up, so we have to do certain things during the test run or before and after. But it's roughly, and most of the time it's less than 2 minutes, but like max is 2 to 3 minutes, and that's like super. Like if you have a regression test that's going to run a bunch of tests and it just takes like 2 3 minutes, it's not that bad. It's pretty good, especially when you're like it's a stage on the deployment pipeline. You want it to be quick and agile, and so we've seen that. All of this contributes to like higher developer confidence. I can say like with this one team that we did this project for, we migrated all their tests to Cypress. This team has kind of become like an example for other teams that have wanted to do the same thing, because this team went from, not having a lot of confidence in their tests and kind of ignoring them to, wow, we have really great tests. Now we're going to actively look into them, maintain them, take care of them. When we do get an alert, we're gonna look into it and figure out, oh, there's an issue here. And then going from that into, okay, now we can do some cool stuff with it. We can integrate them into deployment pipelines or all those other things. That's really been cool. That's a really cool benefit. And then when you're doing an exercise like this, when you're doing a test rewrite, when you're taking into account a new testing tool, this was also an opportunity for us to look at test coverage overall for our team and figure out where are the gaps, what are we not covering, what are we covering too much, like do we have two tests that are doubling up in the same thing. So we saw that exercise was also really cool. And then just the way that you can see the tests in Cypress Cloud too, I'll give a quick shout out there. Like you can see all the jobs that are running, and then it just gives it. It's almost like the test coverage itself is visible within Cypress Cloud based on the job list. So now that you have like a extensive list, that's one of the other benefits of Cypress Cloud, is just having everything in one place. So this has led to some other things too. Broader adoption. So we have the one team where we worked on this massive project, and then I think a lot of team members are now kind of like advocates for Cypress. It's a tool that we know pretty well now, and like we now have an internal Slack channel where we can ask like Cypress related questions of, hey, like I'm trying to implement this test, like can you help me out? And we have a mature knowledge base now of the tool Cypress, and then like tips and tricks and certain things that you can do within it. So that's a huge benefit when you have everybody kind of on the same page with your tooling. Integration. So I think there's been a lot of work around integrations. It wasn't like an immediate overnight thing where we said, okay, we have our tests now and we're just going to go and do all this cool stuff with it. We worked with a lot of our teams and created certain integrations and like tools on top of Cypress so that we can utilize the benefits of the Cypress tests and then bring them into some other things that we needed. So like for deployment pipelines or GitHub Actions. And then, so another cool thing about doing something like this is, you have like a focus on your reliability overall. And you can see that as we've increased the test coverage with Cypress, we can see it like a benefit of reliability overall. And now you can see that pretty clearly. And we have like leadership objectives now that have kind of allowed us to put a refocus on better test coverage for certain teams. So we've had several teams look into their tests after this and see like, hey, we want to do what that team did. And so that's been really cool to see as well. And then we have like kind of similar to advocacy, we have a lot more support for Cypress within our organization. We actually have an internal shared like Cypress package that takes like all the shared helper functions, commands, like everything you would need in your Cypress project at Zendesk. And then like, let's say I'm a new team and I'm going to spin up some Cypress tests. I can just pull down our shared package, and then all of our helper methods are available to everyone. Everything from getting test accounts to like special things that we need to do in our tests. It's all available. So that's one of the things that we've been building as well. And that's a huge benefit of having a lot of people using the same tool. And yeah, so key takeaways, right? So massive reliability boost. Sometimes switching to a new tool can be all you need to just get some wind in your sails and improve what it is that you're working on. And we definitely saw that with Cypress. When you're looking at doing an improvement on your testing and you're looking at, okay, what are all the things I need to do? There are going to be some initial hurdles, but I've learned that despite all the hurdles, like there are so many benefits on the other side of it. And when you're able to have a solid testing tool that allows you to write tests, visualize your tests, like Cypress has been a massive benefit for us. And we're able to see like so many great things come out of that. So organizational impact. Yeah, so I've mentioned this a couple times, like success in one team has led to other teams saying, hey, like we want to get better in testing too. Like let's write some Cypress tests and let's look at what we have. I think that's hugely beneficial for any organization. And then I think the coolest thing too is as our knowledge of Cypress and our tooling, our testing tools like continues to improve, we're kind of growing into more of a mature understanding and knowledge of these tools with like Cypress and all these things. And, as we go along, like just the other day, I saw somebody put up a PR for a Cypress test and they did something really cool with the way they like selected an HTML element a certain way. And I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that. That's really cool. So we can see our knowledge is kind of improving as we have more people and more teams implement Cypress. So yeah, I think overall, it's just been a huge benefit to have these reliable tests. And I think the starting point to that was implementing and adopting Cypress. I think it's really easy to get used to what you have. And sometimes you just need that little wind in your sails in the form of a new tool or a new framework. And I highly, highly, highly recommend Cypress to anyone who maybe has had some of the similar issues that I described with our team. And I definitely think Cypress, like rewriting your tests in Cypress is a way to kind of revitalize your testing process and get some good tests in place. So I think, yeah, that was my presentation. I want to open it up to any additional questions, but yeah, like I love Cypress if it's not obvious already. And yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. That was a really awesome talk. In fact, the stats you provided, your team's ROI, it kind of blew me away. Can you think about how much of that you feel like is attributed to the cultural shift that you mentioned happened at Zendesk?
Yeah, I think specifically for this team, it starts in one small place and then kind of branches out. But like we started out with a problem and we really wanted to have a better system of tests in place. So I think slowly as other teams started to notice, like, we'll have kind of some reviews that we'll do and we'll look at all tests in general. But as people start to see, hey, like this team has massively improved their tests, like what's going on there? And so, we've kind of had a great benefit of sharing our results with other teams.
A little bit of test envy. I like it. All right, we're going to take some questions from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and put our first one on the screen. Could you share some of the primary causes of flaky tests that you encountered during this process? And what are some ways you address those sources of flake?
Yeah, so I can speak to the tests that we had before, and then in general, I think the tests before I think just through the years, working on different projects and some of the tests just kind of unfortunately fall away if you're not actively maintaining them. So let's say somebody somewhere changes something in a page, and then you have to go back and you have to be reactive and you have to go say, okay, hey, this button changed or this, like let's say there's a data test ID, or not even that. Let's say there's like a ID that you're using to target an HTML element, and that changes somehow. One of the cool things in Cypress is that you have like the contains command. So I can select the button that says, okay, find the button that contains this text, regardless of the class name or the ID. So there's little nitpicky things that would pop up like that, as well as just some tests like not being looked at enough. So those two things are kind of the primary causes of the flakiness that we encountered. And yeah, it's there's a lot of like basic commands that Cypress gives you that just like fixes a lot of that, which is awesome.
Excellent. We have another question from the audience, specifically about your ramp up process. And they're wondering if there were any concepts that were particularly challenging to convert to Cypress during this migration.
I would say there's two things. So there's one, it's giving enough importance to the issue. So in order to advocate to do a project like this, you really have to make the case that these tests are important. And after a while, it became like we really needed to do it, because we're rolling out features. You need to have a reliable signal of when something's wrong. So part of it's convincing your team to actually take on the commitment to do it. And then the other part is the initial learning curve. So if you go from like the Ruby, RSpec tests, like that's a whole different way of writing tests versus Cypress. Different language, different framework. I think Cypress is really cool in the way that all the commands are kind of async and they flow in their own way, whereas the Ruby tests are very sequential and you have to write it that way. So people who are used to writing it one way and have to switch their mind to do it the other way, I think that just takes a little bit of massaging in your brain. But once you get past that, it's smooth sailing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Kevin, for your presentation, for answering some questions.